The way for property managers to keep their costs down is to increase their efficiency. We have software costs, we have other things, but by and large, property management is a labor intensive business. You have to hire people to oversee these properties in different capacities to do that. And when you have different owners who want different things done or have different expectations, it breaks that efficiency. And sometimes that is difficult to understand because, like your example, well, I have my lawn guy that can do $50 a month less. Why I'm going to pay you a fee and then pay $50 more for lawn care? That seems crazy. But the idea is, well, you don't realize how much time and energy you're spending right now to self-manage.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with the first ever guest on the podcast, Mr. Chris Grenzig. I brought him back. It's been 5 years since he was first on the show, basically since we launched it in May of 2020, so 5.5 years now. And I wanted to bring Chris back on the podcast really to talk about how his business has changed, how what he's working on has changed, and a little bit of a backstory for all the listeners out there. Chris previously worked at a large real estate investment firm out of New York, where he was personally living at the time. And he decided to strike out on his own and start buying value-add multifamily deals himself and with some investors. He actually moved down to Florida, which is the market that he was focused on. And that's led to a whole number of things within his business. He's since moved within Florida to Orlando, pursuing value-add multifamily deals. But he's also started JAG Communities, which is a property management company based in Orlando that manages both his own assets and then also is doing third-party as well. And in this episode, Chris shares why he started the property management company and why he's been, really bootstrapping that line of business. One, the psychology of, starting another line of business as he's trying to and continuing to grow the sponsor platform of where they're going out there and actually buying deals. We also just talk about what it means to be a property manager. And we get into how property managers best work with their clients, some of the challenges of owning a management company, really how he views growing the management company in tandem with growing the multifamily real estate platform and actually going out there and buying deals. So I think this is going to be a great episode for the folks out there who are, managing their own stuff, bootstrapping a management company, who want to learn more about how to most effectively work with their property manager, as well as the folks out there who are looking to just go out there and buy multifamily as well, because we get into that. So without further ado, let's get to Chris Grenzig. But before we do, again, reminder to leave the podcast a rating and review. That's how the show gets noticed by more folks, as I'm saying every week. So if you've learned anything from the podcast and you've got 5 extra seconds in your day, scroll down on the iTunes app or the Spotify app and leave the podcast a nice 5-star rating and review. But again, appreciate you all for listening, and let's get to this episode with Chris Grenzig. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. I'm joined again by Mr. Chris Grenzig, who maybe not his career highlights, maybe not his biggest accomplishment, but in our world, it's a big accomplishment. He was the first guest ever on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast, believe it or not. And I think that was, well, it's over 5 years ago now. We released the first one in May of 2020. So we're talking 5.5 years ago or so now, which is pretty wild stuff. Well, obviously a lot's changed in your world since that first episode. And I think we had you on again too at some point a couple years after that. But let's give everybody a huge refresh here. I know that we have a couple listeners who have actually listened to all the episodes based on what people have told me, but I severely doubt that people remember the specifics of your backstory. So let's talk about maybe how you found real estate, maybe what you were doing before and how you got into the business and the progression of what you're up to today.
Yeah, for sure. That's crazy. I completely forgot. We were the very first episode, so that's crazy.
I was like, I figured I'd surprise you after we started recording with that one. But
yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, time flies. Yeah, so backstory on me, got into real estate in like 2016, worked for a company called Toro Real Estate Partners for about 4.5 years out of New York, 2 owners, myself and an admin. We bought about 3,000 multifamily units while I was there across 23 properties. I oversaw the Florida region of the portfolio, which was 1,000 units in Jacksonville. In 2020, I was buying a 16-unit property with myself and a family member. Decided I was actually going to leave at that time, which was not my original intention, and move from New York to Florida and do everything myself: property management, construction management, or renovation management, whatever you want to call it, asset management, all that stuff, and just kind of build a company and see what we could do. And I never had, property management or renovation management experience before that. So moved down, just figure it out. We've bought about 150 units to date across 5 or 6 properties. We still own 51 up in Jacksonville. In late 2023, early 2024, relocated from Jacksonville to Orlando, Florida, and also opened up our third party property management company. So we used to just own and operate our own stuff. Now we also manage for other owners as well. I think as of right now, we have around 140 doors under management, give or take, split between Jacksonville and Orlando. And yeah, just have learned a ton over the years and learned a whole lot more, being more hands-on over the past 4 or 5 years. So excited to kind of just talk about some stuff and share the stuff I know, and hopefully it'll help somebody.
Yeah, no, love it. I think it's interesting, right? I think there's kind of two ways that probably both of us see a lot of folks get into the real estate business, specifically the real estate business being like starting their own. A lot of people coming from another industry or job, maybe they start investing as, a side hustle or as just a way to put money to work. And then eventually they're in a position where they can choose to go full-time real estate, leave a job. But I think there's a lot of folks specifically around me. And, I know you were in New York at the time with Toro, I believe, right? You were up in New York.
Yeah.
I'm in Boston. I see this all the time. Somebody works for a large real estate investment shop, between maybe a small team of 5, anywhere up to really some of the big institutional places, kind of learn the ropes in another business, and then they set out on their own. I think both, obviously, you can do both, right? There's no right answer in terms of how you actually get into real estate or start your own business. But if I were to go and do it again, I probably would have liked some some work experience on somebody else's, quote unquote dime, or at least kind of develop some good fundamental skills versus kind of trying to figure it out on my own. What were some of the things, I know this is a broad question, but like maybe we'll keep it specific to maybe like evaluating deals or how to think about like deal making and stuff like that, that you learned from working at Toro and overseeing a whole bunch of units, watching those founders buy a bunch of doors before you started actively pursuing deals that you were taking down and that you and some other investors were taking down?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the bigger, I don't know if it was direct insights, but one of the bigger things I think played a role was being in the office all the time around John and Don, who are the two owners, and hearing their conversations between themselves, with brokers, with investors, with lenders, and just picking up on like a lot of those patterns and things they're saying, being able to like hear the phone call and then just be like, hey, you got a second? I just had a quick question for you. And like being able to ask something that's like super in the moment, super relevant, top of mind, and being able to like actively pick those things up. Cause it's, it's one thing to like, right, like listen to you and me talk and talk about things, but it's different to hear those actual conversations day in and day out, evolving over time, and then being able to like have conversations around it, ask questions. And I think that was super invaluable, especially early on, where I could pick up from both of their previous experiences in other jobs. And they were both brokers before that in different capacities. They'd done, deals before that and had good ones and bad ones, and just kind of glean those insights. And I think gave me a platform to build off of, and then go even within Toro as we went on, like as I learned more and gained more confidence and experience, being able to help set a direction or help navigate new things. I was able to more contribute than just like be the helping hand. And then also going off on my own, being able to take those insights and build on them. And I've learned a ton since then, but I think that base was very invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like a follow-up to that in terms of where my mind goes as it relates to like some of the benefits of maybe working at a larger shop, and then how you can extrapolate that into what you do personally, or what anybody who works at a larger shop can then go and take to their own personal business, is, as you mentioned, right, you're watching folks who are operating at a pretty high level within the real estate business on a daily basis, and you're getting a feel of just how they go about conducting business, communicating with the marketplace, working with vendors, speaking with investors, all that stuff. Are there some traits that stick out? You know, maybe it was the guys you worked with at Toro or just any other investors that you may have worked with over the years. You've been plugged into the business for a long period of time, been on a lot of podcasts, worked with a lot of experienced folks, I would imagine, both on the Toro side, but then also through the PM company and, you know, just folks that I'm sure you've networked with. In terms of like approaches to the business or like personality traits in terms of how they approach the business that differentiate maybe the high performers, the people that are really kind of operating at a high level versus kind of some of the people that are, you know, maybe operating at a low level, and low level meaning maybe they're just getting started. Maybe they've only done a couple deals. Maybe they're growing a little bit more slowly, that stick out as kind of like these are some of the common through lines between guys who are kind of operating at this 3,000 plus unit mark in terms of how they're actually getting deals done and operating their business.
Hmm. That's another good question. I don't know. I think I almost wish you would ask me this question ahead of time so I could think more on it. But my immediate thought is I've noticed a few groups where, you know, like we have a client or two, and then just people I know that have an amount of money that anybody would happily take and
Yep.
be very, very comfortable. And the amount of detail they put into the small things, and like the amount of attention they pay to like dollar amounts that you would be like, why are you even concerned about that? And I've even like thought that myself is different than I would have expected. Like they pay close attention to the small things, and not like necessarily nickel and diming. Like they will spend money when it's necessary, but they'll also be like, well, why are we spending this $100 on something? And you're like, $100 to you is like a penny to a normal person, you know? And that's the factor that some of these guys play at. But I think the fact that they do like that culture or the way they think about things is that of like no detail is too small to pay attention to, probably contributes to at least some portion of their success that they've had. And I think that's been really interesting to see, because I think me personally, sometimes not that I don't pay attention to the small stuff, but it's not my first thought of to like, let me dive in deep. Let me look at every single dollar we're spending. Part of that, I think, is also because I'm so entrenched in the day to day that I'm also seeing it as it happens. So it's not like I have to review the financials on a monthly basis. Like if I go back and click through the expenses, I'm like, I remember that. I remember that. You know, like I'm authorizing all these payments. So, you know, I'm doing it in the time. But sometimes I do kind of get caught up in that, like, oh, I'm the one doing this every day. I need to remember to go back and make sure we're reviewing and compare to a budget and really dial in and be like, okay, is this, you know, just a one-off thing? Is this attributable to a larger problem, something we need to take a harder look at? So I think that's one of the things that I've kind of noticed. But I think if you gave me more time, I might have another answer on top of that.
It's a beefy question for sure.
Yeah,
And it's a little, and I asked it in a bit of an abstract way, but
it's fine.
I think your answer and your point there is like is important to make. You know, I like details matter a lot, especially for the audience sake who's listening to this podcast, like for folks who are raising money to go buy real estate, for folks who are managing other people's money. You know, if you're managing an asset on behalf of another owner, like you are in the PM world, like I'm a partner in a PM company, like details really matter. Getting things right is important. Even if you are managing another third party management company, you should be taking a look at the statements and getting into the details. And obviously there is an immediate dollars and cents reason to do that. You know, maybe you catch a bill here, or you realize that you can maybe source your trash contract cheaper with a competitor and it's getting a little bloated or whatever. But I think just the fundamental practice of when you are working with investors or a PM or internal employees or partners or whoever, becoming someone who cares about that then holds everybody around you almost innately to a higher standard without you even consciously needing to express any issues with what you're doing. You know, I think like if you're the client of a PM company and you are every once in a while just asking about a line item on the P&L, you know, on a monthly statement, that PM is going to inherently get the sense that there is some deeper level of oversight than a PM who, even if they are reviewing the statements, is never asking about it, never looking at it. Or I should say an owner client who's reviewing the statements and never asking about it, or just, not looking at it to begin with. So I think that there's something to be taken from that, just from a good best practices standpoint, regardless. But I'm sure, yeah, if I asked you that ahead of time, you'd probably have like 10 things that stick out. But I think that's a good one that's pretty applicable for the audience.
Yeah, I think just a final thought on that. I think it's also a fine balancing act because if you stress out too much over little things, you'll drive yourself crazy in this, right?
Yeah.
Real estate stuff breaks. You're going to have some months where you just have a bunch of invoices or a bunch of things break at the same time, and there's no rhyme or reason. And you might have 10, depending upon the size of your property, but you might have like double the amount of invoices that are $200 than you normally would. And it's like, that doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong. It's just sometimes the way things fall. So I do think there's a balancing act of like, don't stress too much about it, but also know what's going on and, be able to get that answer of like, hey, what's going on? It's like, look, we just had a ton of maintenance requests this month and it was, we just had a higher month than normal, right? Like, okay, like that's fine. Like you can't control when stuff breaks. So just caution that like, there is a fine line to be too obsessive and spend too much time over every little dollar, because then, there's also opportunity cost to your time too. Like, do you need to stress about paying $100 versus 125 for a plumbing fix when you could spend that time to go out and find another deal or something that's going to, make way more than that ever would?
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because the common advice on business podcasts or real estate podcasts or whatever is, you have to remove yourself from the low dollar per hour tasks, from things that are outside of your zone of expertise. Delegation is the first step in truly scaling a business. Focus on the high value decisions in your business versus the low, quote unquote value decisions. But that oftentimes puts a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners in a situation where they are foregoing the oversight of the details, right? And like I'll say that I'm the first, I remember when I first signed on with a third party management company and gave them my 70, 80 units at the time. And I wasn't as diligently reviewing the statements as I should have because I was out there trying to pursue deals and trying to put deals under contract. And yeah, in the gross aggregate, I probably put myself in a position to grow a little bit faster as a result. But I know for sure there was a lot of stuff being missed, right, on those statements, and being able to hold that PM accountable and cherry pick maybe some of the vendor contracts they were signing and how they, the dollars they were spending on renovating units, et cetera. And I think as a business owner, yeah, you want to try to find a balance between the two, like as you said, while not driving yourself crazy. So I think it's interesting, but something at least to be cognizant about, or at least to think about as you're making decisions in your business. Let's talk about starting a PM company, because I think this is an interesting topic. You mentioned you moved to Orlando, you started your management company, you're doing third-party management. Is there a reason you decided to like consciously start doing third-party management and to get into that business initially, and maybe, have that become something that you're spending more time on, or a portion of your time on versus pursuing deals and working with third party?
Yeah, it was a culmination of several different reasons. So when I started the company, I formed two entities on the advice of counsel: Jag Capital Partners, which does like, syndication, asset management, stuff like that. And then at the time it was called Jag Communities, which was our property management. Now we just call it Jag Property Management. We rebranded. We're not licensed to do third party management. You don't need a license to manage your own property. So we just had two entities set up for legal protection, things like that.
Which is good advice as an aside for folks listening.
Yeah, I
That's how you
mean,
should do it. Yeah.
I would think that's applicable in most cases. Obviously, I would always say consult an attorney and ask before you do, but I think it does probably make sense to do that because, a lot of times, at least my experience in Florida is like, if something happens at a property and somebody's going to sue, they're suing the property and the property management company, and the ownership entity, my acquisition company, is not probably getting sued. Who knows? But I don't know. I'm
Consultant attorney. Yeah, Chris
exactly.
and I are just we're two dudes on a podcast, but it's better than having everything under one roof, generally speaking, if we're going to speak in generalities, with the asterisk applied that, you should consult an attorney. But anyways, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. So the idea was to only manage our own stuff, scaled to 500 million in assets over 10 years, built out like an annual growth plan, tried to keep it conservative, things like that, hit benchmarks. So the first, 2 years roughly, we were kind of loosely on track, hitting those benchmarks to grow. And then in, post COVID, interest rates dropped, Florida rents grew like crazy. The development pipeline exploded in Florida, but particularly in Jacksonville, Florida, from about 2021 to 2023, 2024. It was top 10 in the country for percentage of new housing units being built as what was already available. So, percentage wise, astronomical growth. And around 2022, when construction had caught up with inflation, so our prices for things doubled or tripled to get things fixed or renovated. Since I had started doing stuff in 2020, insurance had, tripled or quadrupled. It had 5x since we first got started back in Jacksonville in 2016, 2017. So it had gone on astronomically. And then interest rates surged as well from 3-4% to 6 to 8%, depending upon, a bunch of different factors. So we kind of hit this perfect storm of making things very difficult of in 2022, especially late 2022, insurance was rising with no end in sight. Every single time I talked to my insurance guy every couple of weeks, his estimate kept going up and couldn't project out what it was going to be next year or the following year, which makes underwriting incredibly difficult and uncertain. Interest rates were rising and we weren't really sure what was going on. Rents at that time had kind of flattened and it was looking like who knows what was going to happen going forward. There's a lot of new supply coming online. So a lot of people were starting to talk about rent drops. And same thing with insurance, interest rates, and then construction costs had gone up. So what used to cost us $5,000 to renovate was 10, and so on and so forth. So we spent about the next year and a half, mid 2022 to middle end of 23, beating our head against a wall, trying to make deals work while at the same time fighting battles operationally with our own deals. We had acquired 3 deals in early 2022, and we were hitting our business plan. We were hitting our rents. Things were costing what they were supposed to cost. And then things slowly started changing. We weren't getting the rents we were looking for. Our costs for innovations were creeping up a little bit. Our insurance renewals, when they came up, increased quite a lot. We were seeing interest rates going up. So our plan, a lot of the properties that we look for are heavier value add deals where we can come in, renovate soup to nuts, interiors, exteriors, 100%, refi within 2 to 3 years and hold for a longer term. So that was the plan. So the plan was to refi in a couple years. We got loans that were 5 years, so we had some extra time to do that. That was always the idea, is provide some cushion in case something comes up. Business plan takes longer, rate environment, whatever. But we started kind of hitting all these challenges, and while looking for new deals and operating our own, just became incredibly tough. We started looking outside of Florida for a lot of those reasons. We started looking up the coast into Savannah, into Charleston, and even into the Carolinas to try to see if we could find where deals made sense. But a lot of the country during that time, transaction volume decreased quite significantly. It wasn't just a problem within Florida. It was a lot of the country was dealing with not as severe, but rising insurance costs, rising labor costs and construction costs, and then everybody was battling interest rates. So there wasn't like this magical place we could go to really make deals work. And in general, just going into a new market is not easy. It takes a lot of time up front to learn the ins and outs of a market, to make those connections, to convince buyers and brokers you're a legitimate buyer and you're really there. And we went down those avenues because I just could tell Florida was not going to be a place where we were going to find deals that fit with what we were looking for and how we wanted to underwrite within the next few years, unless there was a dramatic swing and change that we had to do something else. So we tried looking elsewhere. I got the feeling pretty quickly that wasn't going to really do anything. And as much as I would love to say I have all the money in the world and I could just sit there and wait. I do not. Plus, I'm just not the type of person to sit idle. So we started, us, meaning really mainly me and my wife, talking about what to do next. And enveloped in those conversations was my wife is from the Orlando area, which is about 2 hours from Jacksonville. And we were spending a lot of time going to Orlando every weekend, every other weekend, because her family was there. A lot of her friends were there. Coincidentally, my sister lived in the area. And then my dad was talking about moving from New York to the area too. So we were having these serious conversations of moving and relocating because we didn't want to look around and spend the next 30 years traveling every other weekend to go see family. So in that conversation, one of the things I started looking at instead of buying real estate was buying existing businesses. And I thought, well, let's buy a real estate adjacent business. I can have a good knowledge of it. The business can service our own properties. I know a ton of people in real estate, so I could probably generate a bunch of somewhat lukewarm, warm leads overnight. And let's do that. One of those businesses happened to be a property management company in Orlando. I had never considered doing third party management up until that time. But as I started digging into it, I was like, one, there's a lot of things that I need to improve on from a property management side if we do want to service other clients. And two, why don't we look at just getting licensed and start doing this for other owners and using our own properties as a base? So that was ultimately what we decided to do because it was something we were already doing. Low startup costs since we're already doing it. It just really was getting licensed, getting some new insurance, finding some other clients, and we already had some people interested and kind of launching from there. And yeah, it was just kind of a natural segue into doing something else. And, not only is it something that we can kind of focus on as we stay in touch with the market, but it lets us stay in touch with the market at a greater level than we otherwise would with just our own properties. So we have more properties we're managing in more areas. We can see different things that are going on. We're talking to different people, and it's making our management skills better, which only services our own properties. And if and most likely when buying opportunities come around in Florida again, we're only going to be better off for it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a wise approach. One, it's like you're taking what the market's giving you from an opportunity standpoint, which I think a lot of people have a difficult time doing, first of all, right? As it relates to the Florida market due to some of the headwinds that were prevalent with insurance and rates and supply and all that. It's like, it's just not easy to do deals here right now. But does that mean I just exit the industry entirely, which was what a ton of people did? I'm sure we both know dozens of folks who were like, I am now leaving real estate in an like entire capacity, and I'm getting, moving to some other type of business industry, whatever, taking a job, insert alternative move. But I like how you guys were like, look, like we still believe in building a real estate business longer term. We still fundamentally have real estate skills and knowledge of how real estate operates, how multifamily operates. We can asset manage, we can operate, et cetera. Why don't we put those skills to use in another entrepreneurial endeavor that then later serves growing a portfolio if we decide that we want to continue doing that in Florida? And then obviously, you mentioned a whole bunch of personal reasons. And I think property management's a really interesting business because like we own a property management company and we started it with, 90 units, myself and my business partner with my 90 units. And then we were just kind of getting it off the ground and he was more or less running the day to day. But it's a business where like when you get it off the ground, you're able to kind of do it yourself for a while. You're able to keep a really high, you're able to provide a really high level of service to your owner clients because, you got your hands everywhere in the business. And it's one that is a little easier than maybe other businesses to incrementally scale because the revenue is so predictable, right? You're never chasing people, you're never billing clients and chasing the dollars because you're getting paid when the tenants pay rent, right? There's no accounts receivable. It's fairly sticky revenue. It's fairly predictable. As your clients grow, typically you're also going to grow, and you can, more predictably grow that line of a business versus like a construction company, which is also real estate adjacent, where the cash flow is very choppy. You go from job to nothing. You're chasing dollars from your from your clients and your customers, and it's a bit of a headache. That's just a broad observation, but I'm curious as to, as you guys got licensed and pivoted to third party and started taking on clients and actually growing that business, like what were some of the challenges that you encountered early on that maybe like you didn't even consider that they could be a challenge before you actually started growing it? What were some of those like early pain points and things you learned as you started a PM company?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger things, and it's something I still struggle with, is I'm so used to operating in my team who handles a lot of the day-to-day stuff, at least in that property management space, right? Manager, maintenance person. Stuff comes up. They've been with me since 2021, so they've built up a ton of trust with me, bring stuff to me, talk about it very quickly, and we make quick decisions. That's one of the great things about being vertically integrated is like it's not this whole big process. When you have owner clients, it's very different. They, you know, don't really hear from you too much unless there's like a problem. And I'm trying to be better about like reaching out when there's not problems. So that way, every time they get a phone call from me, they're not like, oh God, Chris is calling me again. Which, as we get bigger, I have plans on how to tackle that more, which is a totally different topic. However, they're doing their own stuff. They've got other problems, other businesses. And so when I call them, they don't have the context that I have. They don't have the history that I have with my team. They don't have all those things. And who knows, they might not have the same knowledge or experience that I have and haven't seen the same things I have of like, well, right, if I'm just trying to think of something, trying to fix a 20-year-old AC instead of just replacing it, right? Like, do we spend $1,000 and like how long is that really going to last versus, all right, let's just bite the bullet and spend $4,000 to replace it now. Those are, I really haven't had to deal with that too much, but that's a very easy example of where I know like if this AC is 20 years old, replace it. As it's starting to break, it's going to continue to break until we have no choice. It's cheaper to just replace it now than to repair it a little bit now and then replace it in a year from now. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges is that communication from going from the day to day, being in it all the time, having these little context clues of different interactions and things that you don't share with the owners because you don't need to. It's not necessary. They don't need to be bogged down or bored by those things. But it creates a full picture, and effectively communicating those things to the owners is not always easy. And then also on the flip side, understanding where the owners are coming from, and there's a million different ways to look at a property, own a property, invest in one, operate it, and we are in the grand scheme of things a small chunk or a bigger small chunk of that whole picture, right? There's what, is the property bring them in money that they need to live off of? Do they have a mortgage? Do they have personal stuff going on that they're spending money elsewhere and they're and another bill comes up and they're like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? There's a lot of other considerations that we don't know about. And sometimes it's very difficult to balance those conversations or have those communications between what we're seeing and what the owner is experiencing, and then at the end of the day achieving what hopefully is the best outcome for the property and the owner. And it's very different from being that owner operator where it just comes to me and I can just say yes, no, or get in the weeds or not get in the weeds and do that. So I think that's really the biggest challenge that I've seen so far.
Yeah, it's interesting too because you probably deal with a diverse kind of set or a wide range of owners in regards to how they typically communicate with you and like how they think about communicating with a PM company, right? Which I think is a challenge a lot of PM companies face, which is like, this is how like I used to do it, so why aren't you doing it like this?
Mm-hmm.
Or my old PM used to do it in this way. Like, like why? What's the thought process behind you making a decision in that manner? And I think oftentimes, like, and this is a challenge we have within our PM business as we continue to scale and take on more owners, is like striking the balance between expectation setting around how we're going to communicate with you and how we're going to make decisions and how we like to make decisions, while providing some level of personalized and customized service to our clients. And it's a hard balance to strike. You want to build a scalable and repeatable process oriented business where this is how we do things. And yeah, I know that like the guy down the street like typically does your lawn and he's gonna charge you $50 less, a mow than our guy. But like we can't have these individual vendor relationships for all of these different buildings. And it's like it's an interesting balance to strike as a PM company. And I think I mean, I'm guessing you've probably got a handful of stories that maybe stick out as you've started working with more owners and working with owners of maybe like different levels of experience. But I think it's important for like investors to understand when working with a PM. Like every time you ask a PM to, now it feels like I'm venting, but to like break their process or to step outside of a normal process or to go deeper in a specific decision, it oftentimes lags their ability to execute on what they're just trying to execute on, which is like great day-to-day property management. Is there anything that you do from maybe like, is there anything, I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this, but like anything you do from like either an expectation setting standpoint or anything that you do from like a process standpoint in your business that you're like, this is how we do things, and like owners that come into our world like fall in line, this is how we like to operate assets, how we like to actually conduct business. And I guess maybe put differently, like ways in which you have to kind of re-educate owners who maybe are coming from a different PM or used to self-manage, that sticks out.
You brought up a really interesting topic because I think it touches on something that I have not heard a lot of people talk about. I've heard it somewhat on the property management side where you hear podcasts or people speak within the property management community for property management owners who are trying to grow their business and things, but I haven't really heard it talked too much about on the investing side. And there are a lot of owners who have self-managed or used other property management companies. And it is tough sometimes because there are a lot of small property management companies or agents or brokerages who manage a handful of properties for people. And there are a lot of different ways to do it as well. If I wanted to, I could have a property management business where I'm the only person and I do everything. And I could probably manage, 100 doors, give or take, depending upon what the properties are, without having to spend a ton of effort finding new business and just kind of maintaining that. And could probably be a lot, somewhat customizable to everybody's needs, right? Joe uses this lawn guy, Sue uses this lawn guy, her uncle fixes the plumbing. But even at 100 doors, or definitely beyond that, that makes it incredibly difficult because the way for property managers to keep their costs down is to increase their efficiency. If I can, a big component of property management is the labor, right? We have software costs, we have other things, but by and large, property management is a labor intensive business. You have to hire people to oversee these properties in different capacities to do that. The more doors somebody can manage, the more efficient the business can run. And if I can have two people manage 200 doors versus 100 doors, in theory, I could charge half as much as the person who can only do 100 if I can do 200. So efficiency is a big part of that. And when you have different owners who want different things done a certain way or have different expectations, it breaks that efficiency. And sometimes that is difficult to understand because the short term is like your example. Well, I have my lawn guy that can do $50 a month less. Why I'm going to pay you a fee and then pay $50 more for lawn care? That seems crazy. But the idea is, well, you don't realize how much time and energy you're spending right now to self-manage. It's probably more expensive if you put value on your time than what you're paying us. And in some instances, we're going to get things done cheaper for you. For example, if you have an apartment complex, like you said, the one you always see is trash contracts. Like they're just always high.
Yeah.
50% of them, it's like, well, we can go with the guy we know, we can get it down a decent amount and save money there. Or there's different ways you might be able to save a little bit of money or decrease vacancy or different things. But in some instances, it might be higher. A lot of the vendors that are cheaper like that, usually they don't have licenses or insurance, which is a big no-go for us.
Yeah.
And also, I would advise for any owner, because if anything happens, they don't have any protection. You're going to end up paying for it. But for someone like us, a consideration we have is our real estate license and our insurance and our things where I have a business and my family that I have to protect as well. And I can't sacrifice that for any owner, regardless how big or small they are. And sometimes that is difficult because 99% of the time you send out Bob to go fix something and he's not a licensed handyman or have insurance, probably nothing's going to happen and you're going to get it cheaper. But if you do it at scale enough, that 0.1% chance becomes a lot more possible to happen if you have 1,500 doors you manage versus two. So it is difficult, and there are a lot of owners who want you to bend and flex. And I think when I take the time to explain that process that I kind of just went into, and maybe not as in depth, but a little bit shorter, and just say, here's how we're able to deliver a consistent experience for you and our owners. So that way there's less surprises for you. I have to do things in a certain manner. And in order for me to deliver a consistent people to a lot of different owners, I have to standardize things in a way. And oh, by the way, I manage my properties the same way I manage yours. And I think when I explain that, and especially that kind of that last piece of like, hey, we started out managing our own properties. We designed a lot of our systems that I am perfectly fine with. And I'm giving that same level of management to you. I think that helps ease a lot of those concerns. And there are people who it doesn't work for, and that's fine. We had a woman who called us and she wanted us to get 3 quotes regardless of what the price of the thing was. And I said, I'm not getting 3 quotes for a $150 plumbing job. And she didn't like that, and that's fine. We're not the right one for you. And she self-manages some stuff, and she said, that's how I do it, and it works. And I said, okay, great. Like, best of luck to you. And maybe there is a management company out there that will do that, and that's fine. I just think that is making us less efficient, which that means you're going to have to pay me more to manage your property, and that's worse for you in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's just a lot of folks, especially folks who go from self-managing to giving things to a PM, especially if they're local to the market, especially if they're the guy going there and swinging the hammer at the water heater, especially if they're the dude painting the units. Like, there is an expectation setting process and a recalibration of this is how we do things. And part of why we're collecting a percentage of the monthly rent is so that you don't need to do them. And look, we can probably optimize some components of your P&L and maybe lease at a slightly better rate. And we maybe are a little bit more in tune with the market, and we'll pick up some on the revenue side. So we're going to try to grow the size of the pie that we're taking our percentage out of. But you have to also understand that you're fundamentally paying for a service here. And it's just not going to be as good as you doing it yourself if you're the person who's driving by it every day on your way to work and you've got all these little local contacts that you like to leverage. And I think part of, PM is like when you have those clients, like the one who's asking for 3 quotes for a $150 plumbing job, you just got to, let them go and say, we're not the best fit, and move on and focus your energy on the ones that do enjoy working with you and understand the game, and I think that's a learning process for a lot of investors. And I think a lot of the investors listening to this maybe need to hear that message, which is like, your PM doesn't suck, your expectations are unrealistic. And oftentimes when I hear somebody saying, oh, my PM is terrible, it's like, yeah, sometimes the PM was terrible. And there are a lot of bad PMs out there. But oftentimes it's like, your expectations are completely unrealistic and they'll never be met. And if they
Mhm.
are met by a PM, they're not going to be met long term because it's their business is probably not going to be structured in a way that enables them to deliver those results over a longer period of time, assuming that you're asking for something that's just unreasonable,
Yeah.
which I think
I
is
th
important to note.
I think the other important consideration that is tough to emphasize or show is we I think a lot of PM companies, especially like specialized professional ones, which there are more and more of now, and I think you guys fall into that category, and so do we, is the knowledge that we keep up with local laws and ordinances and how things work. The easy example that everyone thinks of is evictions. Evictions in Florida are not overly difficult. You hire an attorney, it kind of just happens. But there are a lot of steps that you can shoot yourself in the foot on leading up to getting to the attorney. If you don't deliver notice the correct way, if you accept money when you shouldn't, there's a lot of things that I know of that people are doing incorrectly, and it can prolong or disrupt that process or both and be very costly. And those are things that we make sure we do really well, because if I have to go to an owner and say, hey, we started this eviction process and we got to court and the judge threw it out because I served a notice wrong, that client's going to be pissed. There's no room for error when we do that. And will we make mistakes? Sure. But we have enough processes in place. We do enough checks with the attorneys to at least mitigate those mistakes, and any consequences of that are hopefully minimized as well. But the one off landlord or self manager may not understand or keep up with those changes. Our lease that we use is updated all the time as new things happen. So it is every time someone signs a renewal, it is the most up to date lease that a property owner in Florida can have. If you just have a template from 10 years ago from a random real estate attorney, I mean, there's a possibility you have language in there that could void the lease or void a part of it. I don't actually know because we don't deal with that, but it's definitely not up to all the different things that are today. I mean, there's a new law that was just passed in Florida, a new addendum coming out where if your property has a history of flooding and you know about it, you have to include a new addendum in your lease letting the resident know that, hey, like this property has a history of flooding and you have to know that. If you have a template lease from 10 years ago and this happens, like you could be in a whole lot of trouble if a tenant knows about this and it floods and you have issues, and you wouldn't know that if you don't keep up to it and include that in your lease or have a process to keep your lease up to date. And those are the things where it's incredibly difficult to put a dollar amount on, a value on, or have an owner, I don't want to say correctly appreciate it, but have a well enough understanding of how valuable that actually is. Because if they haven't gone through some really bad happenings in real estate, then they don't know how bad it can actually be. We've inherited properties with tenants where, they're 4 or 5 months delinquent. We have to go through the eviction process and the property is thousands of dollars in damage. We had one where it was just a very weird scenario. So this is definitely like not the norm, but we took over a portfolio of single family homes and one of them was just wrecked afterwards. And a part of me thinks that there was like a flooding or something in the property that happened too. Like it wasn't just like malicious damage. I mean, there was definitely some like malicious damage, but like the flooring was messed up, a bunch of the drywall was messed up. And I don't really know what happened because the old property manager didn't have records, didn't know about it. So we really never figured it out. But like, luckily, that was one of those owner clients I was talking about that, they have the balance sheet to write a check for that. But I mean, if that was a one off mom and pop owner, I mean, that was, a ton of money they had to fork over to fix that. And I think that's one of the challenges too of like, look, you hire somebody that is a professional that's licensed that knows what they're doing, you're also paying to mitigate a lot of your downside as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's likely that a third party PM is just going to have seen more than you've seen. I think that is just such a safe statement to make in the broad majority of cases, and is going to be able to pull from their own well of experiences and their team's well of experiences to address problems, to help you make good decisions from a property management standpoint, especially if you're new. And yeah, maybe we keep using this lawn care guy down the street example, but like, yeah, maybe you're spending 50 more bucks on your lawn care, but like there's a thought process here that in the aggregate, you're going to be able to leverage more knowledge, experience, a larger team to alleviate some of the things that you might actually, that you might not even be aware that you're doing wrong, or that you may be, stepping in, which I think is big. Chris, this has been great, man. I want to make sure I get you out of here on time. Where can folks learn more about what you got going on, reach out to you, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, if anybody wants to check us out, our websites are jagcapitalpartners.com or orlandoproperty.management. We do cover Jacksonville and Orlando, so that website is for both. We're just trying to grow our presence in the Orlando area. If anybody wants to just get in touch with me, Instagram or LinkedIn's probably the best bet, or you can just email me, chris@jagpmg.com.
And then real quick too, just in terms of like your ideal clients, or like typically what you like to manage, like within the PM company, you guys doing everything from single families up to larger assets, or is there kind of a sweet spot for you?
Yeah, I mean, we do everything: single family homes, townhomes, small apartment buildings, basically anything, kind of under that sub 80-ish unit space. Once you get onto on-site management, that's different management setup and things like that. And I have ideas, maybe one day we'll do that, but another conversation. But yeah, I think realistically, Jacksonville, Orlando, you know, and just in decent areas and just traditional rentals. We don't do Airbnb, furnished rentals, pad split. We just stick to what we know.
Love it. Awesome, man. Thanks again for the time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.